Good afternoon, folks. East Coast time. Good morning, folks. Pacific Coast time, and good evening, folks. India time, 9:30 or 10 p.m. Welcome to the Open Hour, a discussion on how the debate of last night, the final debate between the contenders, President Trump, the incumbent, and the challenger, Vice President Biden, went. We have a fantastic panel with us today to discuss, was there any knockouts or were there any hits or misses? And what impact would this debate have had? Because it was being looked at very sincerely and seriously by all the analysts and watchers. My name is Robinder Sachdev. I'm the president of Image India Institute. This show is brought to you by the US India Political Action Committee based out of the Washington, D.C. area. Joining me on the panel today is Mr. Roger Sen Gupta and Mr. Steve Alonso. I shall soon be kind of looking at where we are and what we are discussing. May I request our panelists to kind of keep their phones on mute, if you may? Thank you so much. Now, without much ado, and I do understand some of our guests have to leave early, so we'll kind of play it by the ear. And the advantage of a Facebook Live, this is right now going live on the US India Political Action Committee Facebook page, as well as on the Imagine India Institute Facebook page. We request the viewers to please give in your questions and comments, and our panelists will be more than happy to answer your questions that you may have. And we also request you to share this on your own timeline so that the viewership and engagements increase. Now, without much ado, may I invite Mr. Roger Sen Gupta, who's the founder and chairman of the Park Place Group, New York, to give his initial comments and thoughts or takeaways or his analysis of how he thinks the debate went yesterday. Roger, all yours.
Good afternoon, Robin. Thank you so much for having me, and also want to acknowledge Steve. And I just want to pay a little tribute to what US Impact and Sanjay Puri, the founder, because I'm a true believer, coming from our land, we must honor all those who came before us. And let me start by saying, I don't want to take a divided view. We have to take a unified view. We are all global citizens. There's so many factors involved that no one person can make every person happy. So it's also incumbent upon us, as democracy is a participatory process. We all have a different lens. And I was thinking about this today, that how can we unify? How can we create this new America, which can be a paradigm for the new world? It's so easy to criticize someone, but we have to look at the strengths. So I would propose a totally different vision. First and foremost, for all of us who are in America who are registered voters, and I'm happy to see a big turnout in early voting, we must vote. You cannot be sit at home and complain. What are you doing in your community that is in the best interest of your family and your broader community? The thing is, in the history of America, I think, and I've been here for almost little under 45 years, I've spent more time here than in India, it starts with voting. When Sanjay, we started this thing, one of the biggest feedback was Indians don't vote. And thank God in 20 years, we have elected officials from our community. So, as the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, America is the ultimate capitalism. It is unregulated capitalism. But I look at it this way. When America was founded, it was like a corporation. It had a different board. And today, the board has to be different. We have different stakeholders. So the whole paradigm shift, regardless of who gets elected president, not everybody is going to be happy. So what do we do? It's incumbent upon us to have a change. Just like, after 9/11, President Bush started a new section of the cabinet, Homeland Security. I think the time has come for whoever is the president sworn in on January 21st to have a different cabinet member, a different agency that advocates for the working class, that advocates for the middle class. Now, you can say that's the job of the member of Congress. But, we are divided in the Congress, in the Senate and the House. The president needs to be briefed during his cabinet meetings directly with assistance from the Senate and the members of Congress to what is happening. Because no matter who is in the White House, they're in a bubble. You can take the greatest presidents in this century and before, and there's always criticism. So I think it's incumbent to think about that. And the idea that I would like to propose, just like we have social security, I think we need now is a brand new shift and pivot. I will call it social currency. And I leave that, and we can talk about it more. But I thank you for this opportunity for the introduction, and I welcome my other panel members. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, well, Roger. And may I take this opportunity to also welcome now our other esteemed panelist who's also joined in, Mr. Dr. Shiva Ayadar, right? Now, but in the meanwhile, Shiva, welcome to this esteemed panel, and thanks to Steve, we are here discussing the topic as we have. Uh, However, I'll take a slight change in the order in which we're planning to go because Roger has to leave, and the question has come from one of the viewers. And as you understand, this is a very engaging format where we want our viewers to ask our guests their thoughts so that it can be more engaged and more interactions out there. So there's a quick comment which came in for Roger. So Roger, I'll ask you to comment on it, and then we'll move on to Shiva for his opening comments. Now, the question is coming. You can see the questions on the bottom left of the screen. Adarsh Srivastav is asking, Roger, please stretch more on your thoughts. Okay, so if you can expand your thoughts a little bit more on what you
Uh,
were talking.
well, so if we look at the current times of COVID, I call it the COVID economy, right? Certain corporations are profiting, and there's inequity. People who are unemployed. I'm in New York City. Restaurant workers are unemployed. I was on a phone call the other day with a wealth manager in India, and getting an assessment of what is happening in the stock market, the equity market. The pharmaceutical companies are laughing all the way to the bank. I mean, that's capitalism, but we also have unregulated capitalism. All the money that was given out with the program here, how many of the needy people got that? So there is now a whole thing. If we have to, as an example, as Governor Cuomo was saying yesterday, the US is going to be responsible with a population of 300 million to distribute, inject 600 million vaccines. It has taken us only 7 months to do something, I forget the exact testing number, about 100 million. So I think everything is becoming different stakeholders. Every stakeholder in this economic pyramid has to have a direct advocate, not just simple a member of Congress. These political action groups on either side of the party have their own motivation. Who is representing the people who need the money, who are unemployed, the parents, the children, the people at the top at the banks who have corporate jobs, people in the equity markets? They have a different perspective. There's nothing wrong in this democracy. It's just that we don't have we need a pivot in our representation beyond elected officials. Each one of us is incumbent in their own community to have this channel. That's why I think we need to have a different member in the cabinet who will speak directly to the president and have a transparency, and you can use technology to bring this in. If we can put down Homeland Security, which I forget how many, 14 institutions underneath it, we are at a crisis internally. We have the best defense department in the world. We spend so much of our GDP. Let's bring that in our homeland. Social wellness. That's what it's all about. That every stakeholder, the greatest nation on earth, make sure that every single stakeholder has a seat in their community. It's taken care of. This is not socialism. It is morally what's right. It goes in the social structure. There's more divorces now. It starts with children. Children are coming out of single family homes. We come from a land, originally India, we believed in extended family. And there was a richness to that. So we have to also not be afraid to borrow ideas and not put labels. What is right for your family? And there has to be leadership on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think, we've got off to a running start. Firstly, I apologize to our panelists, and I also apologize to our viewers who were watching by and waiting by. We got delayed a few minutes due to some technical snafu at our end. So my apologies for that. But thank you, and please keep your questions and comments coming. As you see, the questions that you put in elicit and ignite the brilliant minds we have on this panel. And it's a fantastic panel, let me assure you. You'll see the brilliance very soon. You've seen the opening glimpses. Thank you so much, Roger. Now, may I invite Dr. Shiva Ayadurai who's a candidate for the US Senate and a very interesting personality. I think a lot of folks already know him, but still, for the sake of those who are not familiar with him, he is from the state of Massachusetts, holding a PhD from the MIT, and a person who holds some very clear views. So, Shiva, your opening thoughts, sir, on how do you see the debate of yesterday went? Were there any clear winners? Were there any hits or misses? And what do you think? What kind of an impact could it have in this last stretch of the election? Over to you, sir.
So you want me to address the debate? Is that right?
Yeah, address the debate, yes.
Sure. Well, I saw the debate. I thought the best part of it was the fact that you could actually hear people and you could have a conversation. But I support the president on a number of things, but I thought one of the most important things was when it came to the Paris Climate Change Accords. And it's an important thing to talk about because for far too long in this country, it's an expose, that part of the debate, which was for me the best piece, because it really shows what's going on in the country between the separation of big academia, big tech, and big media can take something very, very fundamental as science, which is supposed to be the scientific method, which is a pursuit of we have open debate and discussion, and completely convert the scientific method to scientific consensus, which has nothing to do with truth. And the Paris Accords, if you actually look at it, has nothing to do with lowering pollution. In fact, China can double their pollution. India gets to double their pollution. And yet it was marketed with the collusion of big tech and big academia as this savior to the environment. It has nothing to do with that. So to me, that's one of the most important parts of the debate. And there's a video I did, which probably got about 10 million views on it, where I exposed the Paris Accords for what it really is. But to me, one of the important things to start understanding that the political environment has gotten highly corrupt. And the Paris Accords is an example of it. How the debates are structured is an example of it. But I think we live in a very interesting time. We live in a time of disruption, which is, I think, very good. So it's exciting.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. So let's say picking up the climate accord, for example, right, the Paris Accord. Fair enough. There could be, folks who believe one way and folks who believe the other way. Coming out of the debate of yesterday, do you think that it had some impact on the undecided on this aspect of where President Trump stands, for example, or where challenger Biden stands? Do you think the debate of yesterday helped the undecided to kind of make up their minds? Because undecideds are a number, right? Maybe a very small, but it would be a pivotal number. So did the argument of Trump prevail or expand its message, or did Biden's? What's your view? Other than the fact that, you may or I may support one or the other candidate, but what's your assessment? How effective was the message yesterday?
Oh, was that to me or to?
Yeah, Shiva, that's for you. That's the follow-up for you.
So I thought what came across yesterday was, first of all, because you could hear people, what came across yesterday was the achievements that the Trump administration has actually made. I thought that came out clearer this time than ever before. And it also claimed, I think the thing that I don't think Trump harped on enough on the other side, he said it a couple of times, as here's a person who's been there in office for 47 years, and what has he actually contributed? I thought that's one of the most profound statements that came out. So I think if those people heard that, I think it would move some of those undecided voters. I didn't really get any different statement from Joe Biden. There wasn't really, my opinion of him really didn't change anyway. I have my own personal opinions of him, but to your personal question, I think that issue could sway undecided voters when they're looking at two people. What has this guy done here who's been there for 47 years? And I think that could help sway the undecided voter group if they really look at that. Here's a person who's talking about doing certain policies that he could have done 8 years before that or influenced them, particularly in the healthcare side, on criminal justice, et cetera. And frankly, nothing was done on that. In fact, they went the other direction. So I think undecided voters could get influenced that way. But the others, I think pretty much everyone's made up their mind. Mail-in, I think, 50 million mail-in ballots already went out. So I think there's a huge portion of people who made up their mind. But that central issue should, if Trump harps on that, I think it's part of one of the big things that can help sway the undecideds.
Very true. Thank you so much. Yes, I think very pertinent points. Now, may I take the liberty and may I request Steve if I can, slightly change the order because I understand, Roger has to leave. So could we do that, Steve, with your permission,
Of
please? I can
course.
take.
Yeah, happy. Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so, so much. Now, the question to you, Roger, is that it seems that it's shaping up to be a battle between persuasion versus motivation, i.e., most of the people have made up their minds apparently that as it said that whom they are in favor of. So the challenge is motivating your folks to go out and vote, a point that you were talking, right? Plus, at the same time, as Shiva is mentioning, and we were just not talking about the undecideds, and persuading new voters to move to your camp. So yesterday's debate on both of these counts, persuasion to the undecided and motivation of your own base, how effective was it for both the candidates?
Well, traditionally it's been said, up until 2 cycles ago, that there was a certain percentage of undecided voters that would make up their minds in 72 hours. And we had done studies on that. I am not sure at this time that is the case. I would say, and I would like the panel's opinion, I think there's less than 10% at the very most, even 5% that are undecided. I think you have a lot of passion on both sides. But I think, the bigger picture is acceptance. Whoever wins, there's going to be a winner, no doubt. And there's going to be an inauguration. Can the country accept and then do their part in their community? Regardless of who wins, it's still the president of America. And I'm more towards thinking that's the end goal. Is whoever wins, we have to accept he's going to be president for all America, and that's the doctrine that both parties have to embrace. There is really merit of what has been accomplished and what needs more to be accomplished. So I want people to vote their conscience, what's right for them, and go out and vote. And then the voters will decide. We have to also look at, the mathematics and the equation of the electoral college, and that decides it. And as importantly, it has to be transparent with legal authority that there was, all these news that are going on. I have no way of fact checking it from a intelligence point of view. Is it true that there are other sovereign assets that are manipulating the votes? Whatever the accusation is, it has to be verified with all the legal apparatus and the forensics we have, so everybody has the peace of mind that whoever won on their merit, because that's what the people wanted. All I ask is please go and vote and accept your president. Thank you.
Wonderful point and excellent. Of course, you're raising some big picture issues in a very, very concise manner. I think these are top of the mind. Those are the issues and the questions which should be out there. So taking it up and moving to Shiva with the same set of questions, right? From yesterday's debate, or where are we right now, you think, in terms of persuasion versus motivation? Which of the camps is being able to persuade the undecideds more? And which of the camps, Trump or Biden, in your view, is being able to motivate its own supporters more in larger or higher numbers to go out and vote?
Well, it's a very difficult question that you're asking, because it almost, to me, it appears that there's a very divided country. And, if you saw in the debate, there were moments where Biden went to his cue card and he said, we're all one family. It's not his family or my family. It's our family. I don't know if you remember that. And that was an attempt at, this motivational aspect of inspiring people to come together. Trump is obviously, more in the persuasion camp, which is essentially persuading people that, they're career politicians and what have they actually done, and his accomplishments of what occurred over 3 years. So I see. I didn't really get much of the concept of persuade or the aspect of persuasion from Biden, but more attempts at trying to motivate his base that he's the guy who's going to bring the country together, and that where Trump is about being divisive. So, I think the undecided voters, in my view, I think in Massachusetts, for example, it's 60% of people are what are called unenrolled voters. You have people who are Republicans and Democrats. Most of those people obviously make up their minds or have made up their minds. But the unenrolled voters, I'm not sure what the percentage is in the United States, but most of the undecideds are within that unenrolled, or people call the independent voter group. I think it's probably 50% of the United States. And out of that, I think the last poll I looked at said I think there's about 10 to 12%, which are undecided voters among that group. And that group could really flip this entire election. And from my standpoint, what I see is the persuasion piece can, if Trump hammers on that, can win. I didn't really get any of the motivation piece, at least landing on me. But I'm sure for the Democrat base who supports Biden, that's a talking point that they can leverage, right? That, Joe Biden's going to bring the country together. Donald Trump is going to try to divide the country. That's sort of the branding, I think, that's being pushed out there.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Shiva. Now, may I come to you, Steve? A bit late, but my apologies for your opening comments. Firstly, your takeaway from the debate, and what do you think were there any hits and misses, something which would have resonated well with one camp or the other, or which could have taken a pot shot, at the opposing camp, opposing party.
Of course, and thank you very much once again. And so I think interesting takeaways from the debate last night were that it actually was a debate, that we did actually have a chance to have, discussion amongst the two candidates and dive into the issues as probably as best as we could. And it was, some interesting hits and misses and notes were that, when the president did kind of make the off the cuff comment about immigrants and low IQ. I can't imagine that sits well with a lot of most Americans or quite a lot of our viewers as well. And, interestingly enough to note that I think this time whereas President Trump kind of went the route of talking about Hunter Biden and of course with all the new allegations and such, perhaps reeling themselves, that this was maybe a little more effective than just going down the road of addiction and such like that. That's never going to win over the hearts and minds of voters and such. So like I said, it was definitely, we got to tone down Trump this time for sure. And it was definitely more, I think this is more of a race of, like you mentioned, it's a turnout race at this point, in my personal opinion. Yes, there are some undecided voters out there. I can't imagine how many, though, especially with just the 24-hour news cycle and continuous streams of information being available to everybody. I do think this is more, maybe we're at the turnout stage now, and whether the turnout stage is just your quote unquote base, the voters who maybe haven't came out, but even more so the newly registered voters in the various states. Those, like I said, with the margins being so close, those can tip the scales one way or the other. And I guess circling back to one of the important misses I think I noticed was, especially towards the end of the debate, when Vice President Biden was going off about his energy plans and energy ideas. I can't imagine saying you want to, get ourselves out of the oil industry and, cut oil subsidies. I can't imagine that'll win over 40 million oil workers around the country, especially in states like Texas and the most important one, perhaps, in Pennsylvania. I believe Pennsylvania is the Florida of this year. And there's, fracking is a huge industry there. And there's a lot of, oil interests and such. And there are a lot of working families working in oil. I can't imagine that won over too many undecided voters in that state in particular. Perhaps President Trump doesn't need to win over undecided voters in states like Oklahoma, maybe Texas, but I think any shot he might have had at turning Texas blue this year might have gone out the window last night if that message came across.
Sure. Thank you so much, Steve. Now my question on to, I think there's an echo somewhere. Please, if it could be mute. Yeah. Now moving to Roger. Roger, what is your sense of this whole question of what Shiva mentioned as the unenrolled and mobilizing more to enroll, etc.? There's a huge shift out there, and the undecideds. Between the two campaigns, the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign, who do you think is doing a better job of enrolling new voters?
Well, let me just make a comment on what Steve said. And I think one of the most profound statements for the American economy was Biden commenting on the oil industry. if there were any undecided voters who were affected in those states. And I'm really startled by that comment and the depth of it. I mean, I have spent some time with Vice President Biden, and I was stunned for the gravity of that statement. So I think that could be an interesting pivot in those key states. Who has done a better job, of registering voters? Each state, each political party, door to door. The whole question is, what's going to be the turnout? I mean, at the end, we have to really focus the funnel. It's too late to register any voters. We can't do it. Right? How are you going to get people to come out and really hold the people accountable who did not come out? Democracy has always been a participatory process. We are talking about the end result, which we have to accept. I keep going back to that point. We have to also, as mindful citizens, educate people that you have to accept it. You cannot have this hysteria. This is a self-inflicted wound. It is a divided nation. We don't have a choice. But if somebody wins it fair and square, you have to accept it. You cannot have two winners at the U.S. Open. You have to have that kind of respect for that. Honestly, I don't know who's done a better job. I don't follow it on a granular basis. I mean, the blue states do their jobs, the red states do their jobs, and then the machine is the machine. I mean, I know how it goes door to door.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have that data to comment on that. But I think the profound statement, and I don't know if Shiva would agree, was Biden making the comment on the oil industry. To me, that struck me. It did. And I think, Steve, that was a good
Robin,
point.
what part of that? His comment, what? That he is the oil transition?
Yeah, transitioning away from oil.
Yeah.
That's not going to win you many voters in Pennsylvania, Texas.
Yeah.
Shiva, could you expand on what Roger was mentioning and your take on this oil? And yes, exactly what Steve was also mentioning.
That statement is directly connected to the Paris Accords, okay? Because if you remember, it came, I think it was minutes after they were, if I remember, after the Paris Accords discussion. And so there's a whole base of people in the United States. If you look at the entire Green New Deal or New Green Deal or Green New Deal, I forget which way it goes. That entire, to me, I consider that a part of a big hysteria that has motivated a whole set of people. In some ways, if you look at a division, it's those people who believe in the Green New Deal and those people who don't. So if you look at that distinction, you can put, I think the statement that you're saying about Biden about oil moving to transitioning away from oil, pretty much that's a statement that would come out of the Green New Deal's manifesto in some ways, right? Because that's essential in that area. So I think that's I think I agree with you, but I'm saying it's not delinked from the entire Paris Accords and this entire fundamental issue is the environment collapsing? Are we all going to die? That hysteria. And that's where I think I have a very favorable opinion of the president on this. And in many ways, I think this is going to be one of those big issues that divides people by the way, when I was referring to the unenrolled voters, I'm not talking about people who are not registered. I'm talking about people who in Massachusetts, you have three kinds of people who vote. The independent voter, I'm sorry, people are registered Republicans, registered Democrats, and then people are registered unenrolled, they call it. Doesn't mean they're not registered, it means they're independent voters. Okay? So people who have not selected a party. So I don't know how it is in other states, what that group is. I'm saying that the unenrolled, which means the independent voters are not in one party or the other, are the ones who typically make the big decision. But I think the entire Green New Deal, the entire issue, the statement that Biden made goes to the heart of the issue. In fact, it's connected to the coronavirus issue, is that we live in a world right now that the issues have gotten very, very complex. The systems have gotten complex. And there's a very interesting speech that John Kennedy gave in, I think, 1961 to the National Academy of Sciences. And he basically, I'm going to paraphrase this, he said something like this. He said, look, we, which means we, referring to politicians, rely on you, and he was giving a talk to 2,500 members of the National Academy of Sciences, that we rely on you to frankly help us make decisions because the problems of the world have become so complex. And he goes, the conundrum of democracy is that we're relying on a small set of people now, right? So is CO2 changing or not? Is the Arctic ice melting or not, right? Are vaccines a savior for the immune system? Is the pandemic real? You see what I'm saying? These all come down to questions of science. And if the scientific establishment has monetary influences around it, sorry, we start moving away from the scientific method to scientific consensus. And when you move away from that, you basically don't have any more democracy. And when, in Massachusetts, when we built our campaign, one of the ethos was you need to have this concept of freedom of debate and discourse. Today, you have 5 companies, if you really think about it, that control all the conversation. Google, Twitter, Facebook, Verizon, and AT&T. So with that constraint of conversation, you control the scientific discourse. So Biden's statement there is quite profound, as you're saying, because it's basically saying one set of people have believed a certain scientific narrative. We can discuss that, in this conversation, and another people haven't. So when you dig deeper down into that, who is controlling that scientific narrative anymore in the United States? And I would argue, as a scientist, since 1970, science has become pay to play. It's one of the oldest professions. It basically is the oldest profession in the world right now. And you have a lot of people who, and in fact, the people you can really trust anymore are engineers, not scientists. Scientists fit a line to a curve. And that's what that statement's about. The fact that we have to move away from oil to transitioning to another world, it's based on this notion of a fundamental view of science. And I think this is the central point. And what's interesting is the reason I think you have this divide is common sense people who work with their hands, a plumber or electrician, an engineer, they're not buying it. They don't believe CO2 is a problem. They don't believe we all have to wear masks. They don't believe it. The people who are believing this are the vulnerable elites, the people who are quote unquote college educated, who essentially who probably are going to follow that wing of what Biden said. So the divide that I see in this country is actually common sense, people who actually have an understanding of actual physics of what's going on, and people who have this stuff in their head. So I think we live in a profound time.
Sure. And a very interesting point. And now we are getting into some meat and potatoes of a nice discussion, right? Steve, I'll again take your leave, sir, because I understand Roger has to run. And so maybe I'll toss the question to him, leading from what Shiva was talking. So Shiva, Roger, if the aspect is that belief or understanding of science, so why or where is the gap, where is the lacuna in an understanding or appreciation of science? Why is this such a gap of this? In this debate, something which is coming out clearly on the top of both the tickets is that I believe in science and you say I don't believe in science, or vice versa, whichever way, right? Both of them are questioning science. How is that possible? So what is your take on that?
Well, one of my old mentors used to tell me, data is agnostic. Right? We have to be motivated by data. Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge a friend of mine, Ramesh, I believe in disruption and disruptive technology, but there's a transition. There's a transition that has to go from oil to renewable energy. There are government subsidies in place and all that. I just want to give you an interesting, being in New York, and being exposed to the Jewish community, I had gone to a very profound bar mitzvah. And the rabbi said, why did it take Moses 20 years to cross the Sinai? Because he wanted to get rid of the old generation. This whole construct, when we grew up in the oil industry is one thing, we're ready for disruption. But this transition, a lot of people don't realize renewable energy can be great. It also has side effects. There is science on, I'm all for renewable energy, don't get me wrong. But, there was a question raised about what happens to the ocean windmills. A lot of people don't know the subharmonics and what it is doing to the sea creatures. We don't talk about that. So there has to be, efficiency in place, a balance. No matter what technology we have for energy, it is going to deplete some part of that equation. Whether it's silicon for glass, subharmonics affecting mammals, birds getting killed. So here it all comes down to acceptance and integration of what's going to work. A windmill might be great in Hawaii, but does it work outside of Connecticut where there's whale watching? And what is the benefit of that? So these are, I think we have to go to a higher consciousness rather than dividing this. I mean, after this election, everybody should get up and say, this is my America, and this is what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. I understand you have to leave. Thank you so much for your time and your views. We are really, I think the foundation has been laid for a very interesting talk. So any parting comments, please?
Yeah, Shiva, I just want to wish you good luck. I appreciate what you're doing from the behind the community. Also bring the community in. I mean, we are here of Indian heritage. We contribute a lot to this society, regardless of who is president. I remember, I was excited, during our work with Sanjay that we had the first person of Indian origin in the Reagan appointee. So more of that, in different sectors, whether it's medicine, hotels, science, but we also should not forget where we came from in our community. What happens with elected officials, and this is something I feel very strongly about. I think there should be term limits, no question, on either side. And I think now with this Zoom COVID society, we can create efficiencies in the marketplace. I mean, you're running for campaign, how much money you have to raise, and what does the bulk of the budget go for marketing, PR, and who gets that money? The PR agencies, who are they run by? So this is the cycle that we have to come to terms with. All political action committees, all lobbyists, we have to create efficiency, and whatever technology, whatever disruption, we have to look at the bigger picture. Whether we have, 2 terms, another 4 years, why do we wait that every 4 years something is going to change? Why cannot it be a process of the American life?
It's a good point.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good luck.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your kind wishes.
Thank you so much, Roger. Been such a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you so much. Now, that leads us into I think, a very interesting question, which I'll toss to Shiva, if I may. I think the concluding part is that fairness science is what? And as Roger was pointing out, and you yourself out there canvassing and communicating, right? So is it more a question of science communications in one sense, right? Communicating about science, one. But the other thing I'll say is that watching this discussion or hosting this discussion, I'm reminded of yesterday. I think yesterday also one of the key, topical points was around climate change and energy and all. So somehow our discussion today, Steve and Shiva, has also come around to, a lot around climate and climate change also. That being said, so moving back to the point, so would it be fair to say that whichever campaign delivers the ticket, they've been able to communicate their version of science better than the one who will lose out?
Well, let's just talk about this notion of science. First of all, people use, I hear people using the word, I believe in science. To me, this is an oxymoron, that you don't believe in science, okay? And the fact that we've gone to that says there's scientism, which is more of a religious notion of science. But if you really go back to 1970, there was a very interesting amendment that was passed called the Mansfield Amendment. A lot of people don't know about this, but the Mansfield Amendment, there was a time in American science that you had the military budget is massive. And a very small piece of that, which was still a lot, was given in extraordinary ways to extraordinary scientists without a lot of pressure. So you had some guy in some university doing some wild stuff on string theory or some stuff in number theory. People, it didn't bother him because it was a little piece of a very large budget, but it was still a lot. The Mansfield Amendment moved that money because after the Vietnam War, they said that any money in the military budget for basic research had to be for weaponry. So that little piece, which was a lot, went to 2 institutions which were highly political institutions, the NIH and the NSF, starting in 1970. So what that did was it politicized science. And this was a very important inflection point in American history. 10 years before that, Eisenhower talked about it. He says, that when you have the combination of the military-industrial complex, it's going to affect what occurs in society. But that really occurred in 1970. So since 1970 onward, there was a time that people went into academia. Robinder, they went into academia to get away from all the noise of the world so they could actually go do great science. But after 1970, science actually became a money-making industry, a very lucrative industry. So the people who went into that area of academia to do science, they were allowed to be free and talk about anything. It was supposed to be a haven for where you had vigorous debate. You had a lot of radical thoughts. That really started becoming much, much more constrained. And you can look at the tenure process in most universities. The people who started getting kept were not those people who were at the fringes thinking new ideas, but the people who became lemmings and fell in line, unfortunately. That's what happened. So science itself became, because you had to get grants for your graduate students, you had to get grants for your graduate students, you had to get grants for your graduate students, right? It became about getting grants. So today, you put, MIT gets $20 to $40 million on climate change. You put climate change on anything, you will be funded, okay? Anything. And by the way, climate science is not a science. It's a bogus term. Climate science is not climate science. It's actually fluid mechanics, and it's radiative physics. And the people who know that are far and few. So what's happened is we have taken areas of science and we've built it into scientific consensus. So that's what's occurred because of the Mansfield Amendment. And so what you have today is that you have people believing in science. This is a very unfortunate situation. And the good news, though, is that there is people who recognize that there is gravity, there are these physical, there events, and you know who understands that? The common working class. They may not have gone to MIT, they may not have studied radiative physics, but they sure know something doesn't smell right. Because if you're a plumber or an engineer, you're dealing with day-to-day things. And that's why those people are attracted to Trump, and the people who are attracted to Biden are typically, unfortunately, are very highly educated, but vulnerable elites. And that's the division we have going on in this country. And so it's a very profound division that's taking place. So my point is that there's a great C.P. Snow. C.P. Snow was a great humanist. He was a writer and also a physical chemist. And he wrote there's a great essay he wrote, but he used to go to among the elite of Britain, and he used to say, do you know the first law of thermodynamics? And they'd all look at him or say, do you know the second law? But they all knew who Shakespeare was. So his point was that people are studying the humanities in a deep way. Everyone knows Shakespeare or Hamlet, but how many people know the second law of thermodynamics? And his point was that you have a whole set of the educated strata who doesn't understand even what scientific evidence is. Robinder, so for example, if you look at the IPCC report, which is what Biden uses to say we should do this, there are 40 predictions of how much ice is going to melt on the Arctic. 40. One says 0 ice, and the other says 100%. You can see it as 40 graphs. That's not science. That's indeterminacy. Science is evidence is unambiguous predictions. So you have a lot of people who don't even know what science is, and they're uneducated. And then you have a set of people in academia who make money for grants. And that's the world we live in. And that's why we have this discourse about people using the word, I believe in science. There's no belief in science. It's evidence. So
sure. No, thank you so much. I mean, a very, very nice, I think a very holistic approach. I'll come to Steve in a moment, but a couple of observations I'd like to make, and later on the question would be, so like, let's say last 4 years of the Trump administration, where have they taken this, the country towards along the lines that you're saying in terms of, looking at science? And because then why is this, perception out there that Trump doesn't understand science? Not Trump, let's say the Trump administration. That's a very strange label to stick, right? So we'll come to that in a moment. But let's say, Steve, what is your thought on this, this whole discussion on, okay, let's put it this way, that the Trump administration, or Donald Trump, as Biden alleges, doesn't understand science? Because that was the other big part of the debate in some parts pertaining to COVID.
And I think that's just maybe from there. I think it's maybe just another way of.
And is that message stick?
I think it's more of a. It's a way of describing. It's just it's a different way of more of a voting talking point per se. I definitely understand what Dr. Shiva is regarding. Believing in I'm no scientist, trust me. So, but that does kind of resonate and make some sense with science is results. it's believing in, there's things like hope and, desire and things. But when it comes down to it, yeah, there's, science is, tried and tested and, reviewed and analyzed and comes to conclusion. Science should have results. So I do think that is a point that perhaps maybe should be more resonated with the president himself. And I do want to circle back to a point we made earlier, which was regarding, voter registration numbers and stuff, and just regarding, because I do know a little bit of knowledge on this subject. And something interesting to point out, I think, for the benefit of our viewers, would be that when it comes down to voter registration numbers, especially in amongst younger people in college towns like Philadelphia with their big 5 universities, and during the during this COVID times, when a lot of these universities have kept students at home, there's not much there. At least on the Democratic side, they have lost out on turning out the voter registration of the younger folks, because it's no longer there, and they're just the students aren't there. There's common times when you see on college campus at the beginning of the year, there's a lot of folks registering new voters and waiting to line up folks, and that really didn't quite happen this year, especially in a lot of places around the country, in a lot of states, and definitely didn't happen to the extent that it has in the past. So that is something to point out, maybe interesting to see. We'll see where the youth turnout and numbers actually, land. Obviously, turnout numbers are expected to be huge all around, as there just read something now that there's more people early voted in Florida that have voted for Donald Trump total in 2016. So turnout's going to be huge. But yes, then circling back to science and everything, that is a very good point, I think, valid point that Dr. Shiva made. Believing in science and belief. There's, you can believe in higher power, believe like my sports team's going to do good, not any of mine. But it's just, there's, when it comes down, should be some sort of concrete evidence or results, or not. When it comes down to conclusions, I don't think any scientific conclusions have the word belief in it at the end of the day. So that is an interesting point to make, and perhaps the president and his team could do a better way of articulating that, per se. Perhaps so.
Sure.
Look, if you look at if you look at any of these issues, healthcare, right? If you go into climate change, quote unquote climate change, if you go into the coronavirus issue, masks or no masks, any of these issues, there should actually be very little debate on this kind of stuff if you actually go to the hard evidence. And what is evidence? Evidence is unambiguous predictions, which means you don't get 10 different values for something, right? You get a answer that's predictable and you can assess it. And the fact is that we've gone away from that definition of evidence. We are living in a world right now that we have this left-right or black-white dialectic, when if you actually looked at the science, or you looked at forget scientists, in fact, you can't trust scientists, but the engineering, okay? Scientists fit a bunch of data to curve. Engineers have to build something, but it doesn't work, it falls out of the sky, right? So you can believe an engineer, or you can trust an engineer more. But if you take any one of these issues, if you actually go to simple engineering principles, you find out you can actually get to the truth, and you can actually build real people coming together. And that's what we should focus on. There is something called gravity. The earth goes around the sun. These aren't debatable issues. And Sartre said this, he goes, you can actually get to truth even in politics. You can. And when you take any of these issues like climate change, yes, climate does change. It does. And it will always change. But the issue is to confuse weather with climate is a big problem. Once people understand the weather is constantly changing, but there are these global things with climate. Climate's constantly going to change. But the issue is, in science, how much effect does CO2? How much is the question? And that question requires mathematical models. Well, those mathematical models are made on science that we can't even model today. It's called the Navier-Stokes equation. The reason I'm bringing this up is that when you actually peel away this, you actually find out that you can't actually answer some of these questions based on the current scientific understanding. So people, what they're doing is making guesses. And to drive policy based on guesses is unfortunate. If you go to healthcare, we don't take an engineering systems approach. We don't say, wait a minute, it's about the individual having access to their doctor and to their medicines at the lowest cost available. Instead, we've created all these models which have separated that. We've created layers upon layers upon layers. A 5-cent aspirin is costing $50, right? So that's never discussed about in healthcare. So we've moved away from basic common sense. And that's why working people, fortunately, working class people still have common sense. And that's what's the safety of this country.
Awesome. I'll come back to you, Shiva, on this. But in the meanwhile, a viewer has asked a question. And as we were saying that, please, anyone viewing this show on Facebook Live, please keep your questions coming. We have a brilliant panel with an ignited minds, as you can see, when we are delving deep in the middle of election politics. We're talking about science and, the history of science and this. What does science mean, essentially, right? So, but I'll take this quick question from a viewer. I think maybe I'll toss it to you, Steve. Ken is asking, Elon Musk has stated that his next big market for Tesla is India. What can the US India Political Action Committee do to help this? Thank you so much, Ken, for asking. As you know, this show is being produced by the US India Political Action Committee, which works quite diligently for over the last 20 plus years on US India relations, apart from within the United States, its various activities. So, US India relations is a key aspect of US Impact's mandate and focus and mission. So, Steve, would you care to share your thoughts with Ken? And Ken, if you have some thoughts, you can always connect with us or with Steve offline later. Steve, yours, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question and for the viewers and Kenneth. So I think main things what we can do is tackle issues that are very much important to both of our countries, which is trade. In order to really, develop and start the big market over in India, we're going to have to develop and, figure out ways how to more streamline our, our various trade agreements and such. India certainly has the infrastructure to help develop the big market, and certainly, electric cars and electric, things like solar roofs and other things that Tesla does as well would be very much appreciated and needed in that part of the world, and as well as here, obviously. But yeah, in order to help facilitate, making India the next big market for Tesla, that would be to just increase our attention and more focusing in on more of the trade issues like we have for 20 years, of course. But we have seen movement in the needle due to various efforts from U.S. Impact, of course. And it would just be more so to, obviously, we're going to see what the next administration brings in terms of there are going to be two very different stances on trade and two very different outlooks. And so I don't think that necessarily one or the other is going to make anything easier or harder in terms of Tesla entering the market and us being good for both economies. But it's just, really diving deep and seeing how, where they want to sort of take trade as their, the first 100 days of the administrations progress along, and then us, we're focusing our efforts towards trade policy and things of that nature.
Thank you so much, Steve. And Shiva, with your permission, I'll partly answer that question, and then I'll come to the question which I really want to toss out with you. What Steve is talking about Tesla and Ken in relation to your question, I think there could be two specific areas where US Impact is already doing and will do more. One is, charging stations, because the whole EV industry depends upon charging stations and availability of the charging station. So that's one big area. So American companies, SMEs, etc., who could, along with the Tesla ecosystem, be working or having partnerships in India for the EV charging stations. That's one. The other big one is actually batteries. The storage batteries, as of now, mostly lithium ion, but there are other alternative solutions also coming: hydrogen fuel, sodium ion, solid ion, whichever, etc. So battery technologies, and we do know that India is very much looking, Indian private entrepreneurs are absolutely looking at battery technology partnerships with the United States or Japan or Korea, because India needs these batteries, be it for the EV sector, but as well as for the renewable solar, wind, etc. sectors also. So in both of these areas, US Impact can play a decent big role in kind of connecting SME partnerships, who enable the whole Tesla ecosystem. So thank you so much, Ken. Please, viewers, keep your questions coming so that we can pick brains of our wonderful panel.
That's what I was alluding to with my solar comment, because a lot of the solar, even that's Tesla's known for installing these batteries in folks' homes, whether it's to charge your car or whether even just to power your home. So those are emerging technologies and going to be very at the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Sure. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you so much, Ken, because that's the whole beauty of this. We can, in real time, pick up the brains of the panel that we have here. Now, back to you, Shiva. Would you have any thought, by the way, on this question which was there, or should we go back to science and communications?
Well, whatever you want to do. Yeah, I don't know enough about US Impact to basically comment.
Okay, I'll then move on to science and communications for a minute, right? So that being said, as per the discussion that you're saying, now tell me something. The US is, America is perhaps the most advanced, sophisticated society, nation, people, innovation ecosystem. It's not perfect, but it's more perfect than others around the world, right? So if within the US there is a divide that one group, almost same in size to the other group, right, says that you are anti-science, then is there has there been a failure of communicating from this group, which right now I would say the Trump, the Republican Party and the Trump machinery, why otherwise this sense is sticking to them? That's one. And second, you were mentioning about the university systems and grants and how they go. Yeah, that's a great point. I understand. I'm an engineer, so I've also worked on grants and all at times, right? So I understand that. But then in the last 4 years of the Trump administration, what has the Trump administration done to counter that very embedded sense to which you're alluding?
Okay, well, I'll give you an example right at home. I think if you looked at most of the professors at MIT and Harvard, I would say I think 95% vote Democrat. Okay, so just let that sit in for a while. And I did a video, I think about 2 years ago when the Paris Accords, Trump pulled out. I said it was perfect what he did, because I said, when you look at it materially, there is no benefit to the Paris Accords when you actually let go of all your emotional views, okay? Around that time, which I came to find out later, a professor called Dick Lindzen, you can look him up, Richard Lindzen, who was one of the youngest people to be accepted into the National Academy of Engineering. I think at the age of 20 or something. Dick ended up becoming one of the heads of the MIT Meteorological Department, applied mathematician. Dick wrote a letter to, Richard Lindzen wrote a letter to President Trump saying, you did the right thing in pulling out of the Paris Accords. I think about 200 professors went after Richard Lindzen for saying that. Okay, most of these professors had nowhere near the training of Dick Lindzen. Okay, and Dick argued in that letter that climate science is really an engineering science. It is understanding what I just said, fluid mechanics, et cetera, and so on. So I just want to give you that data point. Now, why do I give that data point? Is that the people who are in science today, I could argue, are not people who actually following the scientific method anymore. And this may be hard to hear from major institutions like this. There is the motivation behind science has significantly changed because of where the dollars come from and how people chase dollars. Peter Thiel in his book, 0 to 1, argues, yeah, we do innovation, but frankly, there hasn't been any great innovation in the United States. It's all been incremental. There hasn't been any major disruptive innovation. And in the 40s, prior to the 70s, there was a period where you really engendered bottoms-up science and innovation in the United States. There'd be contests run, all these very incredible ways that we brought up bottoms-up science and innovation. Following the 70s, science has literally become big science, big academia. So there's been a significant shift, and a lot of people have not had time to observe this shift. But those of us who've looked at this very closely, you'll find out that we live in a world of scientific consensus now. And this is hard for people to sort of swallow, because you see people with their Harvard degrees or MIT or Stanford degrees, and there's a tendency to say, or heads of major universities. But there's been a massive shift in how science actually gets done. You saw the article that came out in Lancet, for example, right? When the COVID crisis took place, it was an article that was written. I think you talked about data, Steve, or someone said data earlier. And the article basically said that hydroxychloroquine is dangerous, absolutely dangerous. And Lancet is a very respected medical journal. Number of doctors, can you please show me the data? All right, sure. I want to see the data. And it turned out there was no data. In fact, they couldn't get the data. The paper was retracted. So getting back to this data question, one of the things that's happened is, if we put one of the ways to bring the country together is if you say, okay, when science is getting done and you're coming to some policy based on that science, all of us should have access to the actual data. And one of the things I've proposed is something called the Citizen Science Act, which means any funding that goes into scientific research, federally funded research, when people are doing those experiments, the data should be going to the cloud. All of us as citizens should have it. None of us on this call can get climate change data. None of us. We can just talk about it, but most people are reasonably intelligent these days. We should be able to get data in this world now where there should be open source data. Otherwise, we're always going to be said, he said, she said. And that's where we're at today. And the scientific consensus model supports that policy. So when people say Trump is anti-science and he's not following science, it's coming from people who are benefiting by making him anti-science, I'd argue. Okay, because it doesn't butter their bread.
True.
If you say, look, we're going to cut off this amount of research, there's a lot of people who are not really climate change people in that area or in other areas of biology. You're going to lose a lot of money. So that's where we're at. You have to go back to the Mansfield Amendment and what that did to American science. We're at that point today is because there should not be arguments on these kinds of things. And the reason there are arguments is because a small set of people are deciding what truth is. And their interests are monetary. They're not scientific, I would argue.
Awesome. I think, it's a wonderful discussion going. We could keep going deeper, but I want to touch another topic, which is on race in America quickly for a few minutes. I mean, our discussion is actually paralleling last night's debate, science. And before that, what were we talking? The other topic, I would have one observation, fair enough. But let's say if I were to play a devil's advocate, some of the leading scientific magazines or journals who have never ever kind of endorsed or a candidate are this time around endorsing or not endorsing Trump, right? At least three or four journals.
Yeah.
So there has been some, if not, I would say, I wouldn't say a failure, but yeah, there has been some. Once again, coming to communication, right? The communication or persuasion or the logic has not gone through these guys, or they have such embedded interests, as you're saying, that they are doing what they're doing.
There is. I mean, I forget his name. It'll come to me. The gentleman who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine about, I think 6 years ago, after his winning his Nobel Prize, he said, he goes, I've published in all the major scientific journals, but he goes, they all collude. He goes, they all self-reference each other's citations. He goes, I will never publish in those journals ever again. And he went and started his own journal, okay, which is an open source journal. Randy Schekman, okay, won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. And Randy came out and said this, look, I published in all these journals, but it's an insider horse trading game. And I can tell you that science has become that kind of insider game. So Nature, I think you're referring to, wrote an article, saying the dangers of Trump. Here's a science magazine, which is, to your point, saying, do not, doing a hit piece on him. But the reason is there is the old aristocracy of science, which feels threatened by Trump. And I think they should be threatened for good reason in many ways. But I think if you look at it, the insider trading in science, the insider trading in the scientific institutions really do control all the policies, because they're coming top down. In the old days, you had the scribes, right? Or the Brahmanical priests who would tell the king what to do, caste system, right? And then the king would direct his people. I would argue we're back to that kind of caste system in the United States. It's a small set of university professors today five of them, who can literally direct policy all over the world, or if paid enough, they could literally drive policy. So I would argue we live in a very dangerous time because big academia is unchecked, is absolutely unchecked. We throw Wall Street guys in jail if they do insider trading. And there's a lot of people in academia who do a lot of this insider trading, which affects policies. I was in India, as you know, Robinder. I was appointed as the first outstanding scientist technologist of Indian origin in CSIR, which has been around for 70 years. So I have a perspective on this. And I was the first one to expose the level of corruption in that. And it was quite a big hit I took. But my point, and Modi came in and he's starting to clean up. But the point is, you have an organization for 70 years that basically was insider trading. And we still have that in the scientific establishments, and it's gone to that because of the Mansfield Amendment. So I think all of this division that we have in the country today, it could be really brought together if you look at the public health issue, if you look at the issues of environmental issues, if you look at the issues of innovation, if you look at the issues of race, right? 5 people probably control the discourse on race, 5 university professors. We don't have a discourse on race. There is a real racism, and it's the racism when you divide black and white. But there are people who profit from race, writing about racism and sexism. It's become an industry in academia.
Fair enough. Yeah. We'll come to the issue of race, but I think there's a comment from one of the viewers. And by the way, folks, we are a non-partisan, bipartisan platform. The discussion here is an open source discussion in a sense, if I would say. Welcome to share your thoughts and let viewers and each one of us make our points. We are not out here to score a point with each other, right? We are here to share our ideas and our thoughts. And once again, thank you for your comments. Keep them coming. Joshua writes, Trump isn't anti-science. Not sure what planet you're living on. Fair enough. Also, we've always lived in a world of scientific and other consensus. The letter against Einstein and relativity is only the most obvious that comes to mind. Thank you, Josh, for your comments. Thank you very much. Please keep your thoughts and comments coming. Now, shifting gears to the topic which kind of somehow again crept up logically, organically, the issue of race in America. Yesterday's debate, Steve, do you think that it kind of, it helped or did not help either of the candidates with respect to the perception of where they stand on the issue of race, or quote unquote, as a term is going around nowadays, the healing of America? Which candidate of the two in the debate yesterday you think did a better or a bad or a worse or a job for the worse?
I also think it was more of a bit of a push. I mean, perhaps the president had a chance to clarify earlier remarks he made, but in general, though, I don't think there's very undecided voters if that's their sticking point of what they're wanting to vote on. And, because there has been just so much at the forefront of many voters' minds, especially since everything that happened back in June. And it's very interesting subject, and it's a one that I guess really depends on what's at the forefront of each particular voter's minds, and what are the issues they're really concerned about, and what do they really want to particularly focus in on and hone in on. But so, like I said, in terms of which candidate did a better job of, I think that's honestly depends on whatever talking point you want to hear. I don't think it's necessarily more a that this topic, to be frank, they both have their own, issues and, certain things that they've said in the past, said or have done. Both candidates can look back on, on those things. I do think it's, interesting for, Vice President Trump to point out the crime bill when Joe Biden was there, when he led the committee that was writing the bill. So that is an interesting point to bring up. And of course, a lot of the, interesting things with the president with his, Proud Boys comment in the last debate, and obviously things that he's said over his last 4 years that have not looked favorably in his opinion in terms of, race and outlook in the country. So I truly believe, I don't necessarily know if any candidate moved the needle in either direction when it comes to that topic, but it's just particularly what, I think what folks wanted to hear, and what perhaps what talking point resonated more so on a personal level.
Thank you so much, Steve. And now, we'll be moving towards the closing round of comments and wrap up. But meanwhile, I think Josh had another comment, pretty interesting in a sense. His observation is, thank you, Joshua. Please keep your thoughts coming, guys. Left, right, or center, we are happy to take. We'll toss it to our panel. To whatever extent they would be happy to answer, share, we'll share. Josh is saying, Trump is driving the excesses of the far left, and the left are driving the excesses of the far right. What would be your take on this, Shiva? And then we'll move on to to the concluding round of the close-up.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Josh on this. What's happened is we need to move beyond left and right. The Republican Democrat, split, or we need to actually move beyond black and white. And people need to start understanding that if you look at people who actually work for a living, they're the ones who've been squeezed. Forget the left-right narrative. There was a great article or analysis that came out in the RAND report recently, which said if you look at people's incomes from 1948 to 1971 in all income distribution groups, whether you're making $20,000 a year, whether you're making $1 million a year during 48 to 71, what you found was that everyone's income grew equivalently. So the entire American pie grew between 48 to 1971. After 71 to today, 2018, when this report was done, only in the top 10 deciles did income distribution grow equally. In all the other deciles, whether you have college degrees or not, the incomes have actually gone down. So if you make $50,000 in median income, you should actually be making around $120,000. So income actually, about $50 trillion, that article said, has been redistributed upward. So there has been socialism, and it's gone upward. So to Josh's point, I think what people need to recognize, the right has attacked the left, saying they're for socialism, right? When working people start wanting to organize. But the left has said that they're for the working people. And when you really look at it, horse trading took place, that this fake left and fake right narrative has actually destroyed working people in this country. The average working person today, whether you're black or white, the low-income white households have lost about 50% income, and black and Hispanic households have stayed around the same. The average net worth, by the way, of a black person in Boston is $8. I don't know if you know this. $8 compared to the average white person is $257,000. So when you look at all this discourse that has taken place from the so-called left and the right, even with the civil rights movement, the condition of a black person today is worse than it was before civil rights, if you look at measures like illiteracy. So I want to really emphasize that the left-right narrative, that's why so many people are becoming independent voters in the United States, because it's not sticking. And even if you look at Trump, he used to make fun of Republicans, and he was a Democrat. He was actually a member of the Reform Party. You could argue hijacked the Republican Party to build his platform. But I think broadly what I see going on is that the left-right, and I see it in Massachusetts, is breaking down. People aren't buying it, and that's a good thing, because both of these establishment parties, in my view, have really squeezed and horse traded against working people. If you take something like Obamacare, if you actually look at the eve of when Obamacare passed, it's a stellar example, because when Obamacare passed, both wings of the establishment profited from it. Because when it was about to pass, the so-called right thought that Obama was going to remove, the exemptions for the estate tax. And so a lot of people transferred wealth. There was a $3 million exemption if you were wealthy and you transferred to your kids no taxes. And what Obama ended up doing, he actually increased that exemption to $6 million. So the right profited, and the elites on the right profited, and the elites on the left profited. So big pharma, big hospitals, big insurance, consolidated power. That's what Obamacare did. It essentially delivered a much more of a monopoly capitalism to certain people, and the super wealthy on the right profited. That's a horse trading that took place. So what I find very interesting is that working people are actually the ones on a bottoms-up movement that are waking up. And I think this notion of left and right, I think we're going to see this notion start breaking very, very fast in this country, which I think is a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shiva. I think there have been several concepts coming up in this discussion, and you mentioned right now, compassionate capitalism. I remember about 20 years ago, something, Bush Jr., right? He used to talk about compassionate conservatives. And our think tank, in fact, even the US India Political Action Committee, one of our tenets when we were, figuring out our space, very much kind of, we are not into labeling, but very much into, looking at what does it mean to be a compassionate capital or compassionate capitalism, so to say. Now, before moving on to Steve for his concluding wrap-up thoughts, Shiva, I really want to convey our best wishes from the US India Political Action Committee and from the Imagine India Institute for the work that you're doing and for your public service record in the state of Massachusetts and in the United States of America. So all the best for you for whichever campaigns, whenever you're out there, sir. Okay, yeah. Now, may I invite Steve for his concluding wrap-up thoughts, etc. And now I think we can go beyond, in case we've gone beyond the debate, but hardly, 10 days remain till November 3rd? Where do you see things going?
I think, it's going to be interesting to see in the final days of this campaign. And thank you very much for having me once again, Robinder. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Shiva. It's a pleasure to be on with such an esteemed panelist. And so the things that I really want to point out and note are, like I said, I think it's more of a turnout race at this point. I can't imagine there's a whole lot of undecided voters out there. And perhaps it's more of the turnout of the newly registered voters. Republicans do have a number edge there, but of course, all the polls and such are trending in Vice President Biden's direction. And it's the common, all the big turnout right now, but is it, are Democrats early voting or is it Republicans? 4 years ago it was a little different, but I think this is a whole new ball game now with the coronavirus and such. So I guess third panel here I'm on, and I'm gonna keep a similar prediction. I especially after last night, I can't imagine those oil comments are going to help any undecided or questionable Biden voters go over the hump there, because that's a huge industry in the state. And that combined with, they're haven't really been able to register as many young voters as I assume that they would have liked to, especially with, activities on campus not really being as active, and there's not as many boots on the ground registering the young voters, the new college kids and the ones coming of age. That didn't quite happen this year. So it's really going to be interesting to see the margins and how much that really kind of plays into and affects the race. I'm remiss to say I still believe, I think the president might pull it off. It's going to be very close. And because all he really needs is to hold his own map, and he can lose Pennsylvania too and keep the Midwest. And he still goes over the line. So it's going to be interesting to see how everything goes in the final days. And once again, thank you for having me, and thank you for joining us as well, Dr. Shiva. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you so much, Steve. In fact, the comment from Josh coming in response to this discussion. Thank you, Josh, for participating in this discussion. This is what we really mean by interactive, and interconnection or cross-pollination of thoughts. So Josh writes, like science, the wisdom of the crowd or collective intelligence doesn't care about your party, let's say X party. Let us focus on a rational, empirical, and ethical spectrum versus a left-right one. Thanks for your responses. Thank you, Josh. I think that's where our panel also converged, and what Shiva was also mentioning quite passionately towards the end, that let's kind of move away from the left-right spectrum, approach, and versus go back to, being rational, empirical, and ethical, approaches towards how we look at data, science, and knowledge and truth in a way. So thank you, Josh. And now may I invite Shiva for your concluding comments, please, sir.
Sure. I think one of the most profound things that's taking place, whether people like Donald Trump or not, is that we have more people following politics now, I think, than ever before. And I think that's a good thing. So you have people, whether you're on one side or the other, people have gotten passionate about politics. People watch it, whether they watch it for entertainment or they get angry or not angry. There's splits in families. But I think it's a healthy phenomenon, because before, people were sort of keeping their head under the covers and not really participating. So that's a good thing. We see that in Massachusetts. We run a very different kind of campaign, but we've got over 3,100 volunteers on the ground. And the people that are coming out are not just college students. It's working people, which means people have a job, and then they come out and hold a sign or they do stuff. So the reason I'm sharing that is I think we live in a very interesting, even though it may seem disruptive and difficult for people, we live in a time of amazing opportunity, because we're able to start looking beyond left and right, beyond black and white, and looking at working people starting to unite. Meaning, when I mean working people, I mean people actually create companies, innovate, make things, people work hard, nurse, doctors, etc., because they're starting to realize that the political things have profound effects on their day-to-day lives. That wasn't so, I could even probably argue 5-10 years ago. So you have that phenomenon occurring, and it's broadcast on social media and TV, etc. So I think all of this is very good. And I think where we're going to end up is going to actually be a very good place. It may be difficult for people to see that right now, but I think it's going to force people to recognize that you have to come to truth, or you have to really focus on the real aspects of freedom or health, that forget, all the rhetoric. What is actually real? And I think that's where we're at. We're at that inflection point. So I think it's a very good thing. So I think it's a great opportunity that we say as part of our campaign, beyond left and right, beyond black and white, that people should start uniting, working people unite. So that's what I want to leave everyone with.
I do also want to extend my, well wishes to you, sir, as well. Good luck with your campaign. I didn't have a chance to say that before. And I think that is something very, very good point you just made as well. It's really going to come down to, and then this is our goal here at US Impact, is to make voters more informed. The more informed electorate, the better. The less the electorate is focusing in on perhaps, just, one-liners or talking points. That doesn't really help America. It doesn't help the folks out of work due to coronavirus. It doesn't help the voters concerned with racial inequality. When it comes down to it, the more informed voters, the better. And I believe I can speak for all of us at US Impact. That's the goal of these dialogue series, is to just make more folks informed and exchange ideas.
It's awesome. Thank you for all your work. Yeah.
Yeah, Shiva, you were saying something?
No, I said thank you for all your great work, because I think the more conversations we have, the more dialogue we have on these issues, in openness, all these important issues, I think we'll get to truth, because the free flow of information is where you get to truth. And if you don't have that, you essentially, that's a serious problem. And I think that's when people get into these polar camps, because ultimately I think we all want the same thing. I think if you look at most working people, they want to know what the truth is. They want to have great health for their kids, and they want to know that there's discourse and debate, and it's not no one's going to be censored. And I think everyone wants those three things. I don't think anyone does not want them. Those
I
three.
agree.
I mean, in Massachusetts, for example, we started exposing some of the fundamental issues on how the voting systems work and how there's issues in potential fraud. We found out when we did our polls, everyone's interested in it. It's not just the right or the left, everyone. So there's certain issues that everyone gets interested in, equity, integrity of systems. These are things I think we can rally people around. And if we do, you'll find great solutions.
Thank you so much, Shiva. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thanks
It
for
was such a pleasure to have you, and look forward to being in Connect and on panel and discussion and continuing this conversation always with you. Thank you so much, the US India Political Action Committee. Thank you so much, the Imagine India Institute. Thank you so much, in fact, the viewers, the questioners, because guys, see, we are here, we are talking. As a host, I have some questions in mind how to guide the conversation. But the fun really happens when the viewers who are watching the Facebook Live come by, pop up their questions, because their questions could be coming from any tangent, and that's what kind of helps us move out of the box, though we do not want to be in the box, but it kind of pushes us to challenge ourselves and to think outside, or to push the envelope in what we do. So thank you so much everyone for watching. Thank you the panelists out here. This was the Hangout Hour with Robinder Sachdev, where we look at America Votes 2020 as a series in partnership between the US India Political Action Committee and the Imagine India Institute. This Today we were analyzing last night's debate of Trump versus Biden, which in fact our conversation also ended up in some senses mirroring. We ended up talking about science, we ended up talking about climate change, energy, oil and gas, the issue of race, the issue of academia, innovation, etc. So that was a brilliant panel, folks. Anyone watching, please keep on the lookout for the Facebook page of US India Political Action Committee, which is facebook.com/USINPAC. And you'll be able to see our future lives, our past Facebook live streams also. So thank you everyone once again for being with us. Till the next time, ciao.